Okay, our scripture reading this morning is Genesis 39, verse 2 and 3. So if you'd like to turn there and read it along with me. How's that? All right. Genesis 29, verses 2 and 3. If you missed it, we'll read that. Everybody there? All right. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man, and he was in the house of his master the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was in him, and that the Lord made all he did to prosper in his hand. May the Lord bless the reading of his word this morning. Thank you, Gary.
Good morning. Good to see all of you here today. I understand that quite a few went to the camp meeting, and that's wonderful to have the opportunity. Wonderful that you have the opportunity to be here today and worship together. God bless you. You know, we are in a spiritual war in this world. And it says in Psalms 105 that God sent a man. He sent a man into this spiritual war that we're in. Not only did God send this man into the spiritual war that we're in, but God also sends you and me into the spiritual war. Now, this man that God sent into the spiritual war, he himself was the message sent by God. Now, I want you to think about this. God sends us into the spiritual war, and you are the message from God in your sphere of who you know in this world. Now, the person I'm going to talk about here today is a young man by the name of Joseph. If you want to take your Bibles here and turn to Genesis 37. And as we talk about this spiritual war, have you ever gone into a war and you don't know what you're supposed to do? That's what many people have done as Christians. They've gone into this spiritual war, but they don't know what they're supposed to do. It says here, Christ desires through his people to answer Satan's charges. Through Christ's people, the principles of God's kingdom are revealed. So, in this spiritual war, we are to answer Satan's charges. We're God's people. We're to answer Satan's charges. How? The principles of God's kingdom are revealed through us. The principles of his kingdom to answer Satan's charges. As we take a look at Joseph, we're going to see that's exactly what Joseph did when God sent him, and he was going to be a message. And we're going to learn from Joseph to see how we can be obeying God's principles, answering Satan's charges in this spiritual war. It starts out here in Genesis 37, verse 2. It says here, Joseph was 17 years old, and he was feeding the flock with his brothers. Now, what would that mean? That would mean he's a shepherd. He was feeding the flock with his brothers. Go on down here to verse 4, and it says that his brothers, they hated him. That's what it says. says all of his brothers hated him. They couldn't speak anything peaceable to him. They probably gossiped about him behind his back, did all kinds of rude things towards him, didn't speak well towards him when they were face to face with him. And it says here in verse 11 that his brothers envied him. Now, hate and envy, what would that finally lead to? Well, it says here in verse 20 of chapter 37, they wanted to kill him. They wanted to kill Joseph. It was the first time that Joseph ever realized that these brothers who I thought loved me, they actually hate me. They hate me. They have envy for me. And now they want to kill me. Now, whose principles would those be? The devil's principles, right? No doubt about it. Hate, envy, murder. The devil was at work, wasn't he? He certainly was. But our God, he was also at work concerning Joseph's life. It says here, God implants principles where a man's way is to devise and scheme. God will implant principles within us to live by. But man's way, devise and scheme. And that's exactly what those brothers did concerning Joseph. In fact, they even went to their father, Jacob, and they told him that Joseph was dead. And it like to have broke his heart. They were devising and scheming. And that's the way the devil does his work. Remember now, we're in a spiritual war here in this world. We want to know what's going on, and we'll find out what's going on more so by the life of Joseph. Well, Joseph, instead of being murdered by his brothers, they decided to sell him. And these people that they sold him to were going to take him to Egypt and resell him. Joseph had a decision to make, though, a big choice. And that big choice was, here my brothers are treating me this way. Am I going to choose and do the principles of the devil? Or I'm going to make a choice and do the principles of God in this spiritual war. And you know what? He decided to do the principles of God and his kingdom. But you know, Joseph, he realized that I can't do this of myself. Of myself, I can't do this. So you know what Joseph said? Lord, be with me. I need you every step of the way to implant this within me, to do your principles. And it says here in chapter 39, verse 2, the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man. If you want to be a success in your life, turn to the Lord and say, Lord, be with me. Be with me every step of the way, Lord, because of myself, I can't get these things done that you want done. I need you. Well, we well know that these people, they took Joseph And they took him and sold him to a man by the name of Potiphar in Egypt. And he became a slave. Well, you might kind of wonder, what kind of a slave did he become when he was in Egypt? In Ephesians chapter 6, it points out what kind of slave that Joseph would be. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 5. It says here, servants, be obedient to those who are your masters, according to the flesh. Be obedient to your master. Potiphar was his master now. He was going to be obedient to his master, Potiphar. And it says here, with fear and trembling, in sincerity of heart as to Christ. So he was going to have a sincere heart in this. Not with eye service as men pleasers. In other words, when the boss comes around, you get real busy, you look busy, look like you're doing your work. But then when he's not around, you take a little nap. That's not good, is it? No, not at all. He says, not with eye service as men pleasers, but as servants of Christ, doing the will of God from where? The heart. Doing the will of God from the heart. In other words, it starts on the inside. The Lord is making the way on the inside of us. It goes on here. It says here in verse 7, with good will, doing service as to the Lord and not to men. Doing service, willing service to your master, who's your boss. You want to be a blessing to your boss. And that's exactly what Joseph did. Joseph began doing his work, and next thing you know, things are turning out wonderful. His boss likes him. Potiphar likes him. In fact, here in verse 3, it says, and his master saw that the Lord was with him. Wow, Potiphar saw that. And that the Lord made all he did to prosper in his hand. Isn't that wonderful? His boss saw that. Hey, the Lord is with you, and everything that you're doing, the Lord is making you to prosper. He's giving you success. What was his secret? The Lord was with him, and it says here, in many cases, the common people serve their rulers. Wealth, education, position are seen as ways of controlling people. Jesus' kingdom would use different principles. God's kingdom, different principles. It says, Jesus called leaders to be servants. Those with talent, education, wealth, or positions of power are to serve their fellow men. That's what Joseph did. Joseph was going by this principle to use his ability to be a blessing to other people. Isn't that wonderful? For you to be a success, you can do the same thing. Lord, be with me. Work in me in such a way to where I use my abilities to be a blessing to my boss and to other people. Guess what happened then? I lost my place. Just a second here. It says here in 39, verse 5, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house. Potiphar's house was blessed for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in his house and in his field. Everything was blessed because of Joseph. It wasn't because of some big CEO in the company. It was because of one person that decided to, Lord, be with me because I want to do the principles of your God's kingdom. I want to do those principles, be with me. And God is at work to bless everything that you have, to bless even the company that you work with. And they wonder, our CEO, he's doing great. No, the Lord is blessing because of that one individual that says, Lord, be with me. Yeah, isn't that wonderful? Yeah. And the company doesn't even know it, but God, he knows it. He knows why he's blessing that company. Well, the sad thing about it is Potiphar, his master, had a wife. And here in the scriptures, it points out that in verse 7, that she was casting her longing eyes on him. And according to the Bible here, it says, she said, lie with me. This lady, she had no respect for her husband. She had no respect at all for Joseph and what he thought. She was going by her emotions and not by principle. And when Joseph ran away from her, she accused him of raping her. Now, is it just like the devil, isn't it? Just like the devil, trying to get you into something. Then as he tries to get you into something, then he turns around and he accuses you. That's exactly what he does. And he wants all of us to be accused. The wonderful thing about it is, though, is that Joseph, he did not expose her faults. He just left it up to the Lord. He did not expose her faults. He had no joy in doing that. He left it to the Lord. And guess where he wound up? He wound up in prison. Wound up in prison. But you know, when he was in prison, he met a couple of fellows. One of them was a chief butler. The other one was a chief baker. And Joseph, on his way to prison, though, he still had a choice to make. And that choice was, am I going to start doing the principles of the devil? Because I'm kind of angry about this. Or am I going to start continuing to still do the principles of God's kingdom? He knew he was going to be a prisoner in prison. He decided, I'm going to do the principles of God's kingdom. But Lord, be with me. Be with me, Lord. And it talks about that here. It says, the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy. And the warden there, the keeper of the prison, he saw that the Lord was with him. And whatever he did, the Lord made it to prosper. That's wonderful, isn't it? Everywhere he went, people noticed that the Lord was with him, and that everything that he did, it was God that made things to prosper. Made him a success in his life. But he wound up meeting this butler and a baker, and he noticed that they were very sad people. And he asked them, he said, why do you look so sad today? In verse 7 of chapter 40. Why do you look so sad? See, Joseph had a merry heart. That's how he worked, with a merry heart. The Lord was dwelling in his heart. And when you have a merry heart, according to Proverbs 15:13, you have a cheerful countenance. But Joseph, he was concerned about these guys because they had a sad countenance. They did not have a merry heart. Joseph was very concerned about people. He couldn't help it but love people. And that's just the way he was. It says here, as Joseph was dealing with these people in prison, it says, all need kindness and sympathy. When the children of God show mercy, kindness, and love toward all men, they are witnessing to the character of the God in heaven. They show what? Mercy, kindness, and love. All need kindness and sympathy, especially those guys that need it the most right there in prison. They probably needed it more than anybody else. And there Joseph was to do that. Well, we well know that not too long after that Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, he had a big dream. Nobody could interpret that dream, only God. And Joseph knew it. Joseph told Pharaoh what that dream was all about. Why? Because God told him what that dream was all about. Joseph told Pharaoh, God has a plan, and this is his plan. And God gave Joseph wisdom to cooperate with God's plan. He says, this is God's plan, but this is what we need to do so that the people won't starve. See, he was very compassionate and concerned about people. Though these people, they were in a foreign land and everything, he was still concerned about them. He wanted things to go well with them. So you know what happened? Here in chapter 41, it points out that he became the governor throughout all the land of Egypt. What Pharaoh said about Joseph was that in verse 38, that Joseph was a man in whom was the Spirit of God. When Joseph asked God to be with me, Lord, be with me, the Lord was in his heart. The Spirit of God was in his heart. But Pharaoh told him, he said, in verse 41, I have set you over all the land of Egypt, over all the land. Then in verse 46 it says, Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh, and you know what he did? He went throughout all the land of Egypt. And he was living by the principles of God's kingdom, and the Lord was with him to make him a success, to where everything would prosper in the hands of Joseph. And as he went out through all the land of Egypt, everybody could see what our God is like. Wonderful. God sent a man to Egypt. God sent him to let those Egyptians know what God is like. And that's exactly what Joseph did by doing the principles of God, answering Satan's charges. And Lord, be with me every step of the way. And in this spiritual war that we are in, that's exactly what we do. We do the exact same thing. God sends us into the world, and we reveal to this world that is dark exactly what our God is like. When Joseph, when he went to Egypt, Was he able to give a Bible study? No. How about a prayer group of people? No. No, he couldn't do that. He couldn't even tell them what his God was like. Didn't even speak their language. He had to learn their language. I'm telling you, friends, is that just because I'm up here speaking, doing my part of what I try to do in Christianity, it doesn't make me any better than any of you. God needs each and every one of us to go out and let our light shine in this dark world. You may feel like you're not doing anything, but just by coming and sitting in the pew, you can't maybe do special music. Well, I can't either. All I'm able to do basically is what I'm doing right now. And I'm doing the best I can at it. And that's all the Lord can with us. But you may feel like you're very unimportant, not doing anything. Set your mind, friends, to doing the principles of the kingdom of God. And Lord, be with me every step of the way. And you will be a success in this world. Just do what God tells you to do, where he sends you and where to go. He'd do it. Well, we know that Joseph, he saw his brothers again later on. You know what? Joseph had forgiveness for those brothers. He had forgiveness for those brothers. And in Genesis chapter 50, it points out that he told his brothers, he said, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." Isn't that a wonderful way to live your life? You know that bad things are going to come your way. Evil things are going to come your way. But God is always at work to turn things around to be good. I like that. I hope you do too. I hope you do too. God is always at work to turn things around, though they appear to be bad. Friends, we see Joseph as a shepherd. We see Joseph as a hated brother. We see him as a slave. We see him as a prisoner. And he became lower and lower and lower and lower. It's like God was working on him in such a way so that his brothers hated him. He became more humble. He became a slave. He became more humble. He went to prison. He became even more humble. By the time he was there in front of Pharaoh, he was even more humble. That's the way he works. That's the way he works, to humble us. And by the time God sent him out to the Egyptians, he was so humble that he wanted to glorify God in his life and let his light shine. It says here there's going to be employment in heaven. You ever thought about that? There's really going to be employment in heaven. And it says, employment of loving service. We're going to use our abilities to be a blessing and of help to one another, to glorify our God as he sends us out in heaven to meet up with this person, that person, another person. We're going to use our abilities to be a blessing, just like Joseph did concerning Potiphar, concerning the warden in prison, concerning Pharaoh. He used his abilities, Joseph did, to bless people. I like to end here, and it says, knowledge, benevolence, eloquence, gratitude, and zeal are all aids in the good work But, without the love of Christ in the heart, the work of the Christian minister is a failure. You're going to have all these attributes, but not have the love of Christ in the heart. And if you don't have the love of Christ in your heart, you're going to be a failure. Because Joseph had the Lord being with him every step of the way, and the love of Christ was in Joseph's heart, and it made him a success. We have a choice. If we want to be a success in this life with Christ in the heart, the love of Christ in the heart, or be a failure like that minister that all these wonderful attributes could do all this stuff, but yet they really don't have the love of God in the heart to produce love in them, to love people. We all have a choice, friends. We all have a choice, just like Joseph had a choice. And that choice is, am I going to do the principles of the devil in this spiritual war that we're in? Or am I going to do the principles of God's kingdom? And realize that, Lord, be with me every step of the way, because I can't do this of myself. I cannot do this of myself. If you would like to look up the principles of God's kingdom, they're in the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew 5, 6, and 7 tells all about the principles of God's kingdom. That's what he wants to instill within us and send us out into this dark world to prove Satan's charges to be false. I pray that each and every one of you, by the grace of God, Lord, be with me every step of the way, will be a success in this world. Because God sends each and every one of us just like he sent Joseph. God bless you.